I'm here. I'm I'm listening to my heart. I really love my body. We have a really nice time on the inside of us. I have a beautiful partner. We live in a beautiful part of the world. We have a gorgeous community that we live in. There are so many blessings in my life. And Julie and I, when we go for a walk around our village here, we often say, okay, three things. What are the three things that we're grateful for? And those things help me to remind sometimes of the little things, just the little things that can bring so much joy. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be a simple, simple thing. But that, to me, brings more, richness than some of the big milestones in my life. I've got to appreciate the little things more and more and more.
This is the Recovery After Stroke podcast with Bill Gassiamis, helping you navigate recovery after stroke.
Hello and welcome back to the Recovery After Stroke podcast. This is episode 233, and to learn more about my guests, including links to their social media and other pages, and to download a full transcript of the entire interview, please go to recoveryafterstroke.com/episodes. If you would like to support this podcast, the best way to do it is to leave a 5-star review and a few words about what the show means to you on iTunes and Spotify. If you're watching on YouTube, comment below the video, like this episode, and to get notifications of future episodes, subscribe to the show and hit the notifications bell. My guest today is my friend, Bill Lee Emery, who has recently overcome a throat cancer diagnosis and who has the most amazing approach to recovery and the most amazing outlook on life. The wisdom he shares is relevant for people overcoming any health setback. If you are anything like me, you will see how our conversation is applicable to stroke recovery as well. Bill Lee Emery, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you, Bill. It's so good to be here.
It's so good to have you here. It's been a long time, my friend. How long was the last time since we caught up?
I don't know that my memory goes back that far.
Was it at my place over dinner, or
Yes,
was it in Queensland at one of your courses?
Gosh, I don't know.
It was one of those.
Bill, at my age, it's not such a good thing to do.
It was one of those. Look, I'm younger than you, and I still can't remember exactly the order. But every time that we were together, it was a really amazing interaction. And although we've kept in touch online through Facebook, and I kind of get to know what you're up to, and you kind of get to know what I'm up to, I was a little bit, shocked about one of your recent posts about some of the stuff that you had been through recently with your health. And I know it's not related to, I know it's not specifically a stroke story, but it is a story that's similar to one, that a lot of stroke survivors experience. Tell us a little bit about what happened to you and what it was that your health scare was about.
So in July last year, I was diagnosed with throat cancer. Fortunately, it was stage 1. So I was lucky enough that I felt a lump here in my throat. I'm going, it's a bit unusual. Thought it might have been a lymph gland. So I waited 2 weeks, still there, and it was a bit hard. So I went to see my doctor. He said, yep, go check it out. So we did a whole variety of different tests, and then I think it was the CAT scan or the biopsy. Said, yep, I've actually had the base of the cancer was at the base of my throat, and this was like an offshoot, if you like. And this is the early warning signal for me. So because I found this and we're able to find this, and it was stage 1. But I've never had a night in hospital in my life. I'm 73. I've never had any major illness or any major accidents. So I've been blessed with good health, and then to hear this was a bit of a shock to me.
can't relate to that specifically because I was a lot younger when I had my dramas, 37. But before that, it was smooth sailing, so to speak, until 37. And how I can relate to you is through my dad, because my dad, touch wood's been really well. He's turning 80 in a couple of days. And what was interesting about going through that time when my dad was unwell, and for him, he was unwell with dodgy knee that he needed to have surgery on and replaced. And he was out of action for about 3 months, where they operated on his knee. Then it was a time of rehabilitation, and then he had to get on his feet. And I remember how deeply that impacted his psyche and how deeply that made him feel, sort of put him into depression and all these things that I'd never seen in my dad before. Really, usually somebody who's quite stoic, able to cope with a lot of stress, challenges, all the things that life kind of threw his way. But then to see him off his feet for 3 months, which was temporary and in the space of his lifetime, because the surgery was only about maybe 7 or 8 years ago, it was such a small amount of time, but it had such a massive impact on him in a negative way until he got back on his feet. What was it like for you to receive that kind of news and then to kind of grapple with what that could mean in your head?
Yeah. So the doctors and several doctors told me this. They said, the thing that will help you go through this is, one is support. And you know Julie, so I have my partner, I have a superb support system. Like, I'm so blessed. So support was one thing, but mindset is the other. He said that these two things will make the difference between really how you deal with what's going on and how you process and recovery, et cetera, et cetera. So one of my default things that I hold in my life is that nothing is good or bad except that I make it. And Shakespeare put it very well when he said in Hamlet, nothing is, I think he said that, nothing is good or bad except how you make it. Or I forget the phrase exactly, but so this I knew was a potentially pivotal moment in my life, especially around health. So it could either be a blessing or a curse. And it sure as heck was not going to be a curse. So I was going to turn it into a blessing. I didn't know how, but that's a framework that I had, that this experience is going to be a blessing for me. I have no idea how it's going to turn out, what's going to happen. So that was my, so let me just skip forward a bit. So during treatment, a lot of the allied staff, including speech pathologists, occupational therapists, and other allied staff, would say to me, "You're amazing, Bill." And I'm going in my own head, well, yeah, I'm amazing with or without the cancer. But I understand what they're saying. What they're really saying is, Bill, the way you're dealing with this is amazing. And for me, it's not me being amazing. The thing that was amazing, if something was amazing, was a structure that I had that supported me through this. So the structure itself is the thing that's amazing. I just happen to be using it. Now, because I've been around, I've trained with elite athletes, I've trained with the national skydiving team, I've worked with world-class golfers, triathletes. So I know a lot about mindset and how to use it. So this was a real opportunity for me to take those things that I've been using for something like 40 years and go, okay, this is where the rubber hits the road. This we've really got to use all this stuff that I know, and it's going to be solid. And so I had some very clear boundaries. Now, when you mention cancer, the response I got from some people when I said, I've got throat cancer, and some people say, "Oh my gosh, how awful for you." I go, no, it is not awful. It is my cancer, my stage of cancer, is 90% curable. So it's not awful. And I would not take on board. And I was kind of, I hope I wasn't too blunt. I was firm, like, that's your story about cancer, and I understand what you're meaning, but it's not awful. It is manageable, and I'm going to deal with it. And so this was the structure that I had inside of my head. And I'm so glad I was strong enough to have that and not get into other people's, oh, you poor thing kind of stuff. And I wasn't going to have a bar of that. Like, they could see the fire in my eyes when they mentioned that. So a couple of people were like, oh, okay, all right. But they got it. They understood what I was getting at, that nothing is good or bad except that I make it. And the other thing I learned through this is no two cancers are the same. And it's the same with stroke, with brain injury. No two things are the same. They may have similarities, but the individual events within a human life. And so because, I'm a healthy human being, I don't smoke. Well, I haven't smoked for like, I don't know, 40 years or something. I smoked when I was a teenager in my 20s. I hardly drink. I've got very good diet. I exercise. So all these things meant that my body was in a pretty good shape. And there are other people that had maybe less healthy structures in their life. And so if they would come to this kind of event, they would have a different outcome. And I got it at stage 1. So it was right at the beginning. And I said to the ENT surgeon, lovely doctor, I said, okay, well, what if I wait 6 months or 12 months? He said, well, you can. But he said, when you come back, it may not be stage 1. So I've been around so-called alternative medicine or natural medicine for 40 years. The medical system is an alien thing to me. I wouldn't take aspiros if I had a headache. I'd use acupuncture points or drink a glass of water or something. So to go into this world of pharmacology and of high-end medicine was something of a complete unknown for me and for Julie, my partner. So we had some major things to learn. And one of the experiences, I'll tell you, this is kind of funny, but kind of tragic. One of the things that happens in throat cancer, and as the ENT surgeon said, he said, swallowing is likely to become, it's going to feel like you're swallowing razor blades. And I'm going, oh, okay. Now, if you're listening, just swallow. And for me, just being able to swallow was something I looked forward to be able to do so without this feeling of I'm swallowing razor blades and it's painful. And I lost my appetite. I didn't want to eat. I lost weight. But anyway, so from what they normally do at the beginning of treatment, so I had. So when I got my diagnosis, Julie and I, we pondered, do we go down the medical path? And fortunately, my naturopath is also a nurse, happens to work with the oncologist that we were talking with. And she said, if I were in your shoes, Bill, I'd go down the medical road. It's a 7-week treatment, 7 weeks of chemo, 7 weeks of radiation, 5 days a week, chemo once a week. He said, it's a short, intense period of time. Once you're done with that, then we can do all the things that I'm used to doing, like acupuncture, naturopathy, chiropractic, etc., homeopathy. Use all those things, not only during as support, but also after. So it was a 7-week, actually 9-week intensive sprint. Now, I have a friend of mine who's had a 7-year journey with cancer, and that's stage 4 prostate cancer. And he actually wrote a book called Patting the Sharks by Tim Baker. I highly recommend people read it. Whether cancer or not doesn't matter. It's his story and what he did. But coming back to this, so at the beginning of my treatment, I'm supposed to have a feeding tube that goes into your stomach. I don't have it here, but it's basically a tube 20 centimeters long, and it's it's a thin tube. It's basically, so if I can't swallow, if I can't swallow, I'm going to die. So you've got to swallow, take nutrition in. If I can't swallow, then at least I can take it to the feeding tube. So I go in for the op, and it's half an op, but they knock you out, and etc. So I come out of this, and I've got a feeding tube in me, and I'm about to go home and say, well, here's some drugs that you can take for pain. So good old hippie me, I said, well, what's the alternative? They said, well, you can take some Panadol. So I've really got this hardcore nuclear-powered, pain control pills. I take Panadol. So I go home, I'm going, yeah, and I take one Panadol. And one Panadol is like farting in the face of a cyclone. It does no bloody good at all. So imagine if you haven't done any exercise, and then Sunday one day you go, I want to do 100 crunches, ab crunches, and then you're going to lie down slowly. The pain was extreme when I lay down in bed because I took one bloody Panadol. And so, and the look in Julie's face, when she's seeing me, and me go through this extreme pain, that was actually harder than the pain itself. Anyway, we went to see the naturopath, and she said, Bill, just take the bloody drugs. And so I had to go, okay, I'll just give me the drugs, man, give me the drugs. So I go back and I take these, nuclear-powered pain control pills, and they worked. So I had to learn to become a servant of my body. So if I don't normally pee at night. Not until I had this cancer. Then my body would wake me up at 2:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And at 2:30 in the morning, I don't want to get out of bed and go do a wee. But I had to realize I am the servant of my body right now. My body needs me to do things. Take the drugs as required. Get up at 2:30 in the morning, go do a pee, and come back and go to sleep. So I became a servant to my own body. And I'm really glad I made that shift, because I stopped doing the internal arguments like, I don't want to do this. And if my body needed it, I would almost salute and just do it.
I love that concept. My dad, going back to the reason for your explanation, is my dad didn't want to be the servant of his body. After a lifetime of being well and doing as he pleased, so to speak,
yeah,
he didn't want to give his body 3 months to just heal from being, having a new knee. And then he created his own additional mental anguish and suffering to the physical suffering that he was always experiencing. And it's unnecessary, because I think that mental anguish decreased the rapidity of his physical recovery.
Absolutely.
And made it, and his mindset was not that of somebody who was going to overcome this adversity. It was somebody who was stuck in a moment in time and couldn't see light at the end of the tunnel, a path forward.
Yeah.
Literally, after being forever well, and then just finding himself for what the Aussies would say, it's like the amount of time he was unwell is like pissing in the ocean. Like, it makes no difference. It's like you're saying about farting in a cyclone and trying to make a difference. It's such a small amount of time, yet to see him suffer through that was worse than seeing him suffering from the pain of being freshly operated on and stitched up and immobile.
Yeah. And that's actually, for anyone listening here, this is such an important point. When I had my PET scan, so the test came back and said, yep, we've got throat cancer here. Then I had the PET scan to see if there was cancer in the rest of my body. So I had the PET scan on a Monday, and I was supposed to talk to the oncologist on the Wednesday. Well, he got COVID, so that kind of blew that out. So I didn't actually talk to him till the Friday. So I had 5 days of wondering, is it just here in my throat, or is it in the rest of my body? And it was like being, I've practiced mindfulness for a long time. Well, this was mindfulness on steroids. I'd walk out, where we live here in the eco village, and I'd look at nature, and I'd going, wow, it's like I was, back in my 20s smoking dope, going, oh, far out, man, look at this leaf. And it was just like every single day, no day was ordinary. Ordinary day, just every day was like an adventure, because I didn't know what was going to happen next. But one of the things I was very clear about, my body was about to go through a whole bunch of trauma, chemotherapy, radiation. Like, neither of those things are pretty things. And what I didn't want to do was to add more stress to my nervous system, to my adrenals. So maybe twice in that period, I would go forward into the future with a negative outcome. Oh my God, what if? I did it twice, and I'm going, whoa, hang on, Bill. I'm the servant of my body. I'm not going to hit myself over the head with all this unnecessary angsting, because I didn't know what was going to happen. And if I don't know what's going to happen, then at least give myself the best chance of something good happening, because it's either a curse or it's going to be a blessing. So I didn't allow myself, I had boundaries on my own imagination. I wasn't going to go forward and scare the shit out of myself about all the horrible things that could possibly happen to me. I knew there was a 90% chance of recovery, and I was going to be in that 90%. So I had a very clear outcome. And so for anyone listening to this, when you get any kind of diagnosis, like, it's almost an indulgent, oh, what if, poor me. I understand it, but it's indulgent. Our body just does not need that extra stress. And I'm really glad I had those, clear boundaries with other people, but I had those really clear boundaries with myself. I wasn't going to do that to myself.
Yeah.
My body was going to have enough to do with as it was.
What's interesting that came up for me when you said it's either a blessing or a curse. Even a curse could be a blessing.
Well, indeed.
Right? Because we label something as a curse before it has been able to fully play out its lifeline, its cycle, and again, labeling it a curse is again taking us down that path of despair, taking us down that path of negative mindset, of stuck, of being fixed, of not being able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Yet I know that, and I'm writing the chapter in my book at the moment, which is a chapter about stumbling across your purpose. It's my purpose, be it this podcast, writing a book about it, supporting stroke survivors, doing all that stuff, came from, quote unquote, what was or appeared to be to some people a curse. I never took it that way, but some people did. And now those people are the ones who 10 years down, if you happen to get into a conversation with them and kind of give them the update of where I am now, what I've overcome, what I've achieved, etc. If you remind them what they said 10 years ago, or what they imagined, or what they thought that perhaps this was some kind of a curse, they would have a completely they would, their head kind of wouldn't be able to comprehend that what they said such a long time ago could have been so short-sighted. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was so short-sighted.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's about perspective. And it's also, it's tough when you get, a diagnosis of any kind. that can be potentially life-changing or life-threatening. But there's so many people doing extraordinary things in the world, and they're doing it because of some event that happened that could have been a curse, but they've taken that thing and they've made it into their life's purpose, their life's work, and they've been able to serve like you are so many people because of that particular thing happening. And many people said to me, am I going to share what I've learned? And I've written a couple of books, as you know. And Julia said to me, "This isn't going to become another book, is it?" I said, "Well, no. Well, kind of. Well, yeah, probably." So of course it is. Of course it's going to go a book, and that's something I'm going to be doing this year, because there are things that any of us, you and I, if you've been doing something for a period of time, you can take that for granted almost. It's like everyone knows this stuff. Well, not everyone does. Not everyone knows the things that you and I have experienced, and some of your listeners have experienced. And so for me, if I can, just some of the people I would speak to in the hospital, and I'll just give them a few snippets, they go, "Wow, that's amazing." Going, "Well, yeah, it is amazing." So it's even more amazing when you use it. So talking to some of the nurses about pain control, about language, a whole bunch of different things. So, this is an event. It's neither good nor bad, and I intend to make it a blessing. So there will be a book, my version of what's, been going through, my life in the last 6 months, so that maybe other people can pick it up.
I feel like, and again, that's just me coming from me, right? I feel like it's your obligation to write a book about it. Do you know what I mean? Like, where I'm coming from. I'm coming from a place of love, right? It's that the only thing we can do as human beings, well, we can do lots of things, but I think the only meaningful thing that we can do is make life better for other people, whether we're here or not.
Yes, indeed.
If we can make life better for other people, our purpose in life, our life's purpose has been met. We've done it. Yeah. And I feel like everybody doesn't have to write a book, but I think everyone has an obligation to write one if they have the resources and if they can and if they choose to. Yeah. And it's like, there's no doubt about it that your version of your story, although it's different from mine, I can learn from it. I have already learned a lot from it. And the fact that you've already experienced what it's like to not be able to swallow and to go through occupational therapy and to go through all the things that you went through, they're things that stroke survivors go through. Stroke survivors often lose their ability to swallow because of the stroke. Others have that ability taken because of the stroke. Then it's complicated by the tubes that go down their throat and the amount of time they need to keep them there. And there's no doubt about it that what we're all doing is, doesn't matter how our suffering turns up, we're all going through suffering and we're looking for a way out of suffering. And that way out is the part of the story that needs to be told.
Yes.
And shared so that others can go, I might try
Indeed.
A little bit of Bill's version and I might try a little bit of that guy's version and so on. And then let's see what happens.
Yeah, because all the things that I did, my system that I had, I didn't make them up. Other people made them up.
Yeah.
I went back and used them, go, okay, I'll take a bit of this. And one of the things that I found really, really useful, and something I've been doing for a long time from my Gestalt training, is I talk to my body. Me and my body have a lovely relationship. We really like each other. I'll hug myself sometimes, and even in public. Don't scare too many people. Don't do it on buses and stuff like that. But me and my body have this really beautiful, intimate relationship, and I've, been doing this for a long, long time. So when I first got the diagnosis, me and my body would have a chat and say, "Hey, body, this is what's going on." And the other thing I did not do is wage war on my cancer.
Tell me about that. This is really interesting.
Because, the war against drugs, the war against terrorism, the war against this, the war against that. In my view, all it does is put money and attention into places where you don't need it. You know, they'll never stop drugs in the world. They'll probably never stop terrorism in the world. But you find all these different companies becoming extremely rich because of it. And so when people have a battle against their cancer or their stroke, they are fighting their own body. Now, me and my body, my psyche, my DNA, my genetics, everything, my view of the world, my childhood upbringing, my traumas, all these different things, we all collaborated together and it came up in a form of throat cancer. So it's like if I was to stub my toe, would be to blame my toe and hit my toe for stubbing it against a rock. Well, I'm part of my toe. If it was my lack of awareness, not just looking where I'm going, then I'm connected to this. So instead of fighting my cancer, I decided to collaborate with my body, because together, all of us, you know, me, myself, and I, and my body, etc., we co-created this. It didn't pick on me. It's something that we did together. So rather than fight it, I would collaborate. And I would talk to my body and say, hey, this is what's going on. Here's some treatment. So even before I had the treatment, before I had chemo, before radiation, I'd tell my body, this is what's about to happen. Take the good things that we need from this, you know, high-end medical system that are so alien to me, and the pharmacological drugs that they're going to give me. Take the best that you need from this, and, you know, let's get rid of the rest as soon as we can. So I'd talk to my body just before I go to sleep. I'd say, hey, body, how are you going? And we'd have this lovely chat. And I had this, I must share this with you. This is just a beautiful vision I had. You know, our cells in our body are dying and replenishing as we speak, you know, all the time. So I had this kind of vision of, there were two cells, and it was like, you know, in a race when you have a relay and there's a baton that you pass from one to the other. So it was like the one that was dying would pass on the baton of the DNA to the new cell, and the old cell would whisper to the new cell, hey, our human being loves us. And so the new cell would get this information that our human being loves it. It would be, oh, wow, good, we're a human being that just loves us and appreciates it. So, you know, it was dancing and running off into the next one. And so I had this, and it was just such a blissful kind of experience.
If you've had a stroke and you're in recovery, you'll know what a scary and confusing time it can be. You're likely to have a lot of questions going through your mind. Like, how long will it take to recover? Will I actually recover? What things should I avoid in case I make matters worse? Doctors will explain things, but obviously you've never had a stroke before. You probably don't know what questions to ask. If this is you, you may be missing out on doing things that could help speed up your recovery. If you're finding yourself in that situation, stop worrying and head to recoveryafterstroke.com, where you can download a guide that will help you. It's called 7 Questions to Ask Your Doctor About Your Stroke. These 7 questions are the ones Bill wished he'd asked when he was recovering from a stroke. They'll not only help you better understand your condition, they'll help you take a more active role in your recovery. Head to the website now, recoveryafterstroke.com, and download the guide. It's free.
You know, I don't take drugs, haven't taken drugs. So
no need.
Don't need to. So, you know, we're just, you know, I could feel the cells of my body just radiating like appreciation for my appreciation of all the hard work that they were doing through this 7-week intense, you know, fairly intense kind of sprint. It was a sprint, not a marathon. So, and just being able to do that, I think, made a big difference.
For as long as I can remember, before I knew that the way we speak to ourselves has a physiological response, right? I used to do that with colds. So I would get a bug over winter or whatever, and I'd let it run its course for a couple of days, and then by day 3 or day 4, you know, I'd be over it as well. I wouldn't want to
Yes.
I'd want to be back out and about and whatever. And I'd go to bed and I'd just say, okay, it's been a couple of days. You've done your thing. I appreciate it. I'm taking notice. I've, rested, and I'm going to continue to rest and get better and heal myself. And the nose, you can stop running now, and the chills, they can go away now, and the rest of the body can just do what it's got to do to get me back on my feet and make me feel better, etc. And I would do that always after probably day 2, maybe day 3, and then the next day I would start to notice a shift in the way that I'd feel and the turn. In the times that I didn't do that, my cold, my recovery, or whatever you want to call it, took a little bit longer, 3, 4, 5 days, and it would extend out, and I'd be off my feet for a little bit longer. And it was, I think, me just not paying attention to what my body was telling me, and then not doing what it needed me to do, and therefore extending that. But when I did pay attention to my body and I did tell it that I was paying attention and listening, it was decreasing the amount of time that it was expecting me to be on my butt resting. And again, I took this into surgery when I was going into brain surgery after the third bleed in 2014, in November 2014. And I remember I had spent about 3 years preparing my body for this particular surgery. I'd stopped drinking caffeine, gluten, dairy, alcohol. All those things were out. And I was in the best shape I had ever been. And the whole purpose of that was to deliver to the surgeons the best possible version of myself. So what they're dealing with is just my head and not with the rest of my body.
Yes.
And that, I figured, was the best gift I could give them, seeing as though I really wanted a really good outcome from them, and I expected them to be on their game, right? And then I remember I got in touch with a guy who is a hypnotherapist, amongst other things, and I asked him to come and take me through a session where the outcome was to have a conversation with my body about how much it was going to bleed during the surgery and for what purposes it would bleed, and when it would be necessary and when it would be okay to stop. And that's basically what we did. We went through that process so that that I told my brain that it was going to be opened up and interfered with, and that when it happened, it wasn't going to be a shock to the brain. It was going to be prepared for it. And that when that finished, that was also going to be a time to just settle down, relax, get into healing, and let the next sort of part of the process take its course. And I don't remember any of that conversation that I had with my hypnotherapist, because I was out.
Yeah.
It was an hour session. It felt like about a minute or two.
Yeah.
And when I went into surgery, we had been given the expectation that this is going to take the majority of the day. I was the first person booked in because they expected it to take the longest, and they were planning on a massive long day. And I was in surgery for half the time that they expected. And it was a real kind of surprise to the surgeons when they were speaking to my wife, saying, look, this went really well. Everything that we needed to do was done. We took out the faulty blood vessel. He is going to recovery now. He's going to recover well, but the surgery took half the time to what we thought.
You know what you're saying here, Bill, it is so important. I learned to negotiate and make deals with my body 30, 40 years ago. And the same thing, I get a cold or flu or whatever, and I say, I'm becoming a servant of my body. Now, in my journey into mainstream medicine and pharmacology, etc. There's this sometimes a separation of views. There's mainstream medicine and there's so-called alternative medicine. And both these fields sometimes throw scud missiles at each other. And they don't learn from the wisdom that have both got. And I have to say, I appreciate all the millions of dollars that they put into these, the machines that were whirring around my head and my body with the radiation, because I might have been in the same state. So I have now, and for pharmacology, I have a great deal of appreciation for that. But one of the things they don't always share is some of the wisdom that comes from maybe a more philosophical approach. My radiation specialist, at the end of my treatment, we were reviewing my progress, and he said to me, he was asking me what I was doing, and I was telling him, because they pretty much heard my story all the way through. He said, "Bill, you're not normal." And I said, "Thank you. Can I quote you?" And he said, "Sure." So that's the first line of my book, "Bill, you're not normal." And really what my point here is that if only the surgeons who worked with you, and I don't know whether they did or not, and I'm assuming that they didn't, that they said, "Hey, this guy, Bill, that came in, how come it took half the time? If every patient that came in did the same thing that Bill was doing, we could get twice as many people in a day, or we could spend half a day playing golf," whatever they choose. So why isn't that they don't go just, "Oh yeah, that just, that's weird," and they don't go exploring, go, "Well, what are they doing?" So I was talking to my radiation specialist, whose full name is Siddhartha. They call it his name, they call it Sid. I'm going, Siddhartha, as in Prince Siddhartha, as in who became Buddha, and he's smiling because he knows, but not too many people, I guess, know that. I'm going, wow, I have got Buddha as my radiation. And he was telling me a story in Western Australia where a naturopathic friend of his wanted to get together with some mainstream people and have a conference where both opposites, if you like, could meet and share wisdom. And it never got off the ground. And he said, "Guess who canned it?" I'm going, "Oh, no, medical people?" He said, "No, it wasn't." He said, "It was the naturopaths. They didn't want to deal with the opposite side." And really what I'm saying is there is a place for integrated medicine where we take the best of both and we get both sides to explore and see what's in the other camp, because there may be some things that are just out of your viewpoint that can actually save a life, that can reduce suffering, that maybe there's some drugs that you do need, maybe there's some homeopathics or naturopathic things that can mitigate some of the side effects of those things. When I got the list of what the chemo can do, there was like 5 pages of all the things that the chemotherapy can do to my body. I think if I looked at that list at the beginning, I would have gone, "Whoa, all of that stuff? No, thank you." But fortunately, I was working with a naturopath. I said, "Well, okay, take the drugs for this, and we can mitigate those side effects." So, as a consumer, I've got the best of both worlds. I've got the high-end, technology and the drugs, but I've also got the wisdom from acupuncture, which has been around for 5,000 years, more, 3, 4, 5,000 years. So I'd have regular acupuncture. I'd go and see my chiropractor. I'd have naturopathy. I'd go and see my naturopath. I'll do all these things to support me because I wanted to give my body the best chance of. So my mantra through this was to heal through it and thrive from it, not just survive. I want to thrive. So now I'm in the thriving part of all of this, because I'll just give an update just before Christmas when I had another PET scan. So it was 3 months out after the end of my treatment of radiation and chemo. they give you a PET scan to see what's going on. And my PET scan was an all clear. So my body has gone through this journey. It's come out. It's all clear. There's no cancer cells anywhere. It's all done. Now, I still need to check every 3 months and then every 6 months, whatever. So, we kind of figured that was going to happen, but it was really good to get the clinical results of clean bill of health. And that's in part because of the state of my body to begin with, but also because of the support that I got, because of the mindset I had, because of all the beautiful. There's another thing that we did at the beginning. Julie and I decided, okay, so this is going to be a journey. We don't know how it's going to happen, but let's have, let's call in human angels along the way. Let's have these beautiful human beings pop up exactly when we need them. And they would, in our health fund, in government services, in the hospital. Would have people coming to do some gardening for me because I didn't have the energy to do that at all. Someone produced pumpkin pie when we were thinking about pumpkin pie. So all these human angels would pop up and go, wow, this is far out. How long has this been going on? So we've kept that going. We're still calling in human angels to help us to do this, to do that. And so this is now a permanent thing. And human angels are everywhere. You're a human angel to so many people. I am to so many people. And so they're there. We just have to kind of, once you call them in, they show up more often because now you recognize that they're there.
The similarities in the stuff that you're coming up with that happened to you, that you experienced, and the stuff that happened to me and I experienced, and a whole bunch of other stroke survivors who I've spoken to, more than 200 now on my podcast, is just uncanny. And I'm going to go over it, but I'm going to do it at the end because I know we're going to touch on more. And I'm not surprised, but now that I've seen the pattern, it continues to pop up in every aspect of life. It's just fabulous that we all share actually the same pattern to get to this point.
Yes.
The point that I got to is stroke's the best thing that ever happened to me. And what you're describing a lot of the key things that made that possible for me to say, and many other stroke survivors who I interviewed to say that. And that came from a situation that was not ideal, suffering. And then what else came from that is, what else it came from was from attaching meaning to that suffering, which then, if you attach meaning to suffering and then you take action on that, then that leads to purpose. Now, some people listening might not be at purpose yet, but they are already in the phase of experienced suffering. They've attached meaning to it, and now they're starting to reach out to make a difference for other people.
Yes. And
what's to come is their life's purpose will emerge, because that's what life's purpose is. And that reminds me of a equation that Viktor Frankl
yes.
spoke about.
Yes.
Which is despair equals suffering minus meaning.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Yes. I was thinking about Viktor Frankl, and he, of course, was a Holocaust survivor. And what's his book, In Search of Meaning? Is that what it was called?
Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah. Which is like, from such a dark and horrendous place. That was his book and his experience, and the way that he approached it was his gift to humankind, which was such a precious gift. And so many people that have gone through horrendous things, but what's emerged from it, and you say, the best thing that's happened to you, and this has been one of the best things that's happened to me, I got to say, because of the gifts and the gems that are there. And if, when something like this happens, we can have the foresight to go, okay, there are gifts amongst this. I don't know what they are, but I'm going to look for them, then you'll find them. But if we go in going, this is shit, this is horrible, this is a disaster, then they're right in front of us, but we don't have the eyes, we don't have the ears, we don't have the consciousness to notice that they're there. And so we miss them. And so we have to go through all this despairing and more suffering. Like, I don't know who said it, but it might have been Buddha, I don't know. He said, but it's like pain is inevitable.
Suffering is optional.
Any living thing is going to experience pain, and suffering is an optional extra.
Yeah.
And to the degree that we do despairing around our suffering, then we don't make anything useful of it. So no matter what happens to us, we can if we choose, and it can take, understand this, can take a lot of courage, it can take a lot of perseverance, it can take a lot of consciousness to go and do that. But the alternative is just despair, and that's just plain shit. Like, there ain't no good thing about just plain despairing, and you can pick yourself out of it. So at least, people listening to this, and if they've listened to, other podcasts that you've got, and for other people, is it comes down to us. In the end, it comes down to us and our state of consciousness and our perspective and what we choose to do with it. Because, pardon me, we can have all this laid out in front of us. It's like going to a banquet and we're starving, hungry. It's laid out in front of us. But until we reach our hand up and pick out, a piece of fruit or, a piece of chicken or whatever, and we eat it, and we consume it, and we do something with it, it's there in front of us, but it's no good until we actually take some kind of action.
Yeah. One of the things that I think Viktor Frankl was really good at was understanding the different types of suffering. So he definitely experienced physical suffering because he was in a concentration camp. They used them as slave labor to build train tracks and to build infrastructure and to build all this stuff that they needed to keep the war effort going. So he was in constant physical suffering because of the lack of equipment, shoes, the beatings that he would receive. And then he realized that there was another aspect of suffering, the mental suffering, which was the one that was going to be his worst enemy, and that he separated the physical suffering from the mental suffering, and he made the mental suffering, he transformed it into, this is going to mean that I'm going to be able to get back to humanity when all this ends, and I'm going to be able to tell the story, and I'm going to be able to help people overcome things. And he also, as a psychotherapist, he was also able to use his skills to support people get through whatever it was that they were going through while they're in the concentration camp with him. And what I think I also understood, but I haven't been able to find a follow-up to it, was that he was also able to, for the moment, while he was in that time, kind of put a pause on the emotional suffering, because he saw so many horrors that what he had to do was disconnect from that for that time.
Yeah.
And then as a result of that, he kind of parked the emotional suffering. And I feel like, but I never got to see any information about Viktor Frankl later, I feel like he dealt with the emotional suffering later.
Yeah.
But while he was in that moment, he was kind of accepting the physical suffering, transforming the mental suffering, and parking the emotional suffering. And they all got dealt with in the appropriate time.
Yeah.
And when you see him speak in interviews on YouTube, maybe I think in the 70s, he's being interviewed about his time and about his experience and what he learned and what he taught other people. He doesn't appear to be the kind of person who I would picture talking about his time in such terrible circumstances and such a terrible situation. Does not put that vibe out at all.
Yeah. And I think, when we're in a time of crisis, let's say there's a car accident and, someone's injured, if we, cry and wail and moan and have a big emotional reaction, then we're not much good. At that point, you've got to, move the body, help the person away, do things, stop the traffic, get help, etc., and park your emotional distress about it, and then deal with it later. And of course, the body becomes a vehicle for anything that's unexpressed, that's not resolved. And so at the beginning of my treatment, I went to see someone who could help me deal with any of the past emotional things that have led to me, because it's the throat chakra. I'm the youngest of three boys, hard to get my voice heard. There's a whole bunch of things around this. And part of my story was, my throat was my weak link. And if I get a cold, it would hit my throat first. So my story around my throat was, this was my weak link. And I've been keeping the story going for decades. Once I realized that, I stopped that. And now this is actually my strength. And my voice has got power. The other story around me is I've got a cast iron stomach when I was a child. So I could eat anything. And that's a really healthy thing to have. So I was really aware of the language around my throat and how I would do this. So, when I look back at all of these things and, the emotional aspect, the DNA aspect, the things from my ancestors, all these different things that culminated in this experience for me, giving me an opportunity to learn more about myself. And one of the other things too, when I was doing my NLP master practitioner, there was one of the trainers, a guy called Peter Dawson, and he was well known in the NLP field for doing what he called slaughtering sacred cows. And what he would do, he would take one of the concepts around NLP and he'd pull it apart. He would slaughter the sacred thing that we had held in the NLP, and he would help us put it back together in our own way. So one of the sacred cows that I've had since I was 28, 29 is I haven't eaten red meat in like 45 years. I did that because I'd come out of the world of computers and start a whole new life. And now I've been meditating. And when I first started, my body said, Bill, you don't need red meat anymore. And I'd been an avid red meat eater. And so I went, okay, sure. And I just dropped eating meat. And then that became part of my identity. I am a non-meat eater. I would eat chicken or fish, but I don't eat red meat. So when I was going through chemo, and chemo just shattered my blood cells, like just annihilated them. My platelets were down, my red blood cells were down. They were just like a mess. And at one point, I couldn't actually have chemotherapy because my platelets were down so low. And then the next week, they were down even lower. So not only couldn't I have chemo, but they had to give me a blood transfusion. And a friend of mine said, Bill, the best way to get your blood cells, your hemoglobin back up again, is to actually eat red meat. And I'm going, eat red meat? But I haven't eaten red meat in 45 years. But now I'm a servant of my body. If my body wants red meat, I'll eat red meat. And my daughter, who's 32 now, and she's a vegetarian, has been all her life, has never seen me eat meat ever in her life. So I'm telling her, hey, darling, guess what? I'm going to eat some red meat now. So I was at a men's retreat, and so I told people what was going on and said, I'm slaughtering the sacred cow. I'm a non-meat eater. Now I'm going to become one. And on the Saturday morning, they most of it's vegetarian. And the Saturday morning, they're going to have sausages and bacon, etc. So I'm going, all right, that's a good time. So I had 2 sausages and some bacon and some eggs and mushrooms, etc. And I ate them down. Too much, too soon. My body was just going, what the are you doing, Bill? So that next morning, I was like, I I missed workshops in the morning. I couldn't participate. My body was just churning, and I just, beef sausage is probably not a good starter. Bacon, probably not a good idea. I would have been, but I'm just having little bits of brisket, little bits. So, and I did tell my body, said, okay, body, I'm going to give you some red meat because of blah, blah, blah. And here it comes. And my body should have said, Bill, not 2 sausages, maybe a quarter of one, and forget the bacon. Let's just do this bit by bit. And so I kind of learned from that. And my next door neighbor was making this beautiful Angus beef lasagna. And it looks so really nice, so lovely. And I had a slice, and I should have had a quarter of the slice because the next day, my body was going, oh, no. So now I'm a very slow red meat eater. But that was me, again, being a servant to my body and taking the things that I'd held as being sacred and going, when I first stopped eating red meat, my body didn't say just for a week, Bill, or just for a year. And I kept it as an ongoing thing. I never questioned it. And so the lesson for me is, whatever I take on board, maybe I need to review those things. And in this space, what my body's actually needing is a little bit more protein from red meat. So I'm taking a little bit. And it really helped me to go, at that time, I'm going, anything is open. I'm willing to look at any part of my life in service to my body. Nothing is sacred anymore. Nothing is sacred. And that was like a big jump for me because, there are certain things that I would hold as being, this is it, this is me. So everything was on the table. The only thing, the higher logical level around this was like, if it serves my body, I'll do it. If it means standing on my head and whistling Dixie, then I'll do that. Whatever my body needs, I'm the servant.
It feels logic. It feels similar to the way people bring behaviors from their teenage years or from their 20s or from, when they were in primary school and apply them to life when they're 30, 40, 50 or 60. And it's like, it was appropriate then.
Yes.
Times have changed. Things have moved on. People around you are different. No one knows your history in the place that you work, for example. That behavior is no longer appropriate. You can stop doing it, expressing it, telling us about it, whatever. It's possible to stop and to change it and to turn it into something else because it just has no value here. It's like trying to plug in, the very first television that was ever invented in 2020. You're not going to get anything out of it. You're just going to be wasting your time.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. And you did it a couple of times. You also did it with your ideas and your thoughts around, modern medicine and whether it was appropriate to go down that path. And up until that time, it hadn't been appropriate. It wasn't necessary. And you did well in, I'm not going to say avoiding it, but in not being reliant on it because you did a great job. And then when it was necessary, it was necessary. And that idea from your 20s to be the hippie version of you expressed itself, but not so fundamentally that it was going to then be in the way of you getting better and being able to tell the story about it and then being able to write a book about it that's coming up. And then also you've gone down that path of changing, turning this or evolving this or growing from this other work that you want to do and help men out. Tell me a little bit about what else has evolved from this situation that you went through.
So I've done a lot of work in the last 10 years around men's work. There's an organisation called Men's Wellbeing Australia, which is a national thing, and there are two gatherings that happen in Queensland. One's called Manhood and the other one's called Manshine. And I went to an elders gathering and was initiated as an elder. So I'm an old fart now. I can officially.
Congratulations.
So, and in that work, men are typically portrayed as not having access to our feelings. And I have to say that's completely wrong. In the right circumstance, we are fully connected to all the feelings that human beings have. But what I
What's
guess...
the distinction? What's the distinction? All right, we are fully connected. So
Yes.
people so men are perceived that way. You and I both agree that we are connected, but what's the distinction there? What is the thing around men and their feelings that's challenging or that's an issue?
So again, it's like, the thing, as we're a teenager, we act in a certain way, and we generalize about life as a teenager or life as a male or life as a female, and that women are more in touch with their intuition. Well, you and I both know that intuition is a human thing. It's not gender specific. But, our cultures grow up and men do this and women do this and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we get assigned certain ways of, men can't multitask. Well, I have to say multitasking is a load of shit anyway. In my view, you're better off doing one thing at a time and being fully present. So part of my involvement in men's work is it's been such a sacred space for honesty and truth and respect. So when we sit in a circle and someone has a talking stick, so only one person speaks at a time, no one tells people what to do. There's no advice giving. There's no philosophizing. There's only owning your own stuff. So we use a lot of I statements. So I feel, I think, I do, not you do, we do. It's me owning my stuff. And within this space, when human beings, male or female, because I know women's groups do the same thing too, when we're allowed to express what we're feeling, what we're thinking, and our experience of the world without interruption, without advice, without someone telling us how to do or how to be, we can become our own healers. And what we do is we create the space around there for absolute intimacy and honesty. So going back to, my early conversation our early conversation about the structure that I had, structure creates everything. Everything has structure of one kind. When we have a clear structure, which leads to a certain outcome, then the structure is the magic. We have to go through and do the magic thing. So, when the doctors and nurses were saying, "You're amazing, Bill," I'm going, yeah, well, right. What's really amazing is the structure that we're using. So in men's work, there's a very clear structure. And I guess why I'm led to this and why I love it so much, it's very heart-centered. It's very heart-centered. People don't care when we go to these gatherings what your status is, what kind of car you drive, how much money you've got, how many houses you've got, your investment. The only criteria, if there's a criteria, is how open is your heart, how generous is your heart, how compassionate is your heart, not how clever you are or how gutsy you are as a warrior. It's what's in your heart. And that's why I love this particular space and why I'm doing a lot of work in that area. And that's where, this next era of my life is going to be around doing that. And the other thing that comes from this too is, I said before that I want to heal through and thrive from. So part of my thriving is helping men in particular, but not exclusively, find their second wind. When you're in a competition and you're in a race, for example, and you hit the wall, it's just like come to this point of exhaustion, but you keep on going. And what happens is you kick into a phenomenon called the second wind, and you've gone through all the hard stuff, the hustle and the grind and the exhaustion and the pain and the determination. And then when you get into the second wind, it's easier. There's less effort. and you get further faster. And for me, a lot of people after the age, men in particular, after the age of 45, 50, they've come from the corporate world, they've done all the hard yakka, and now they want more ease and grace. Now they want to live more from their heart. So my work really now is helping people find their second wind. What's the thing that brings them joy? What's the thing that makes their heart sing? Because in my world, if my heart is not singing, there's probably sobbing quietly somewhere in a corner. And I would much rather use my skills, my things that I've got to help people find what makes their heart sing, and to allow more of that space into the world. Because when I look around the world and all the things that I see happening, which I've never seen before in my whole life. We need more heart singing, singing loudly.
Sounds like it's a support. It's supporting people to apply meaning to their life now that we'll call it hard stuff is out of the way, raising the family, paying off the mortgage, all that kind of stuff, and then potentially even uncover and discover the purpose for their life.
Yes.
Because purpose takes on this weird thing again, we fall into purpose when our kids are born, in that, we make our purpose about our kids, and then they leave the house, and then it's like, shit, what am I supposed to do now?
Yeah, indeed.
My purpose, if my identity is so narrow and it's only ever focused on, I need to provide for my family and for my kids, you're going to be disappointed in about 20 years or so.
Yep.
And then you might have another 40 or 50 years to go, and you have to find another way to occupy your time that's purposeful and meaningful. And it may not be grandchildren, because although grandchildren kind of come, they're the ones that you're happy to hand back.
Yeah, indeed.
And make it somebody else's problem. So that's interesting. I've also kind of find that people fall into purpose at work. For example, they might start off in the first job they ever get, and then that job may lead to a promotion, and that may lead to a promotion. They might not even like their job specifically, but it pays well, it pays the bill, helps them achieve their purpose of raising the family, if they've got a family. If they haven't, it's where they create their community, it's where they create connections, it's where they do all their lifing, and then they get to retirement, or just before retirement, or some crazy corporate takeover or redundancy or whatever, and then everything they've ever done, the purpose for going to work and for living, abruptly comes to an end. And then it's like, I'm 40 something, I'm at maybe midlife crisis stage. What the hell do I do now? Like, who am I? How do I go about life without what I've known for the last 20 years? And I haven't put any thought into, I haven't put any thought to what comes after that phase of my life. And I've been naive in thinking that that phase is forever, a forever phase. It's like as if something is going to last forever and last that long, that I don't have to put any work into thinking about what may come later, or how I need to position, the parts so that they can serve me down the track. It's like it's kind of living life without purpose, but thinking that you have one. And then you realize I actually didn't really have a purpose. I had a task, and my task was to raise my children, to pay the bills, to support my family, etc. And then it's like, wow, what do I do now? Stroke does that. Stroke, illness, whatever it is, takes people from identifying as they did the day before to not knowing how they identify, not knowing anymore who they are, and not knowing how stroke or how illness, can be blended in and made part of life's purpose, or or life's lessons or life's blessings. And it's just a real challenging and battle and can lead to despair, can cause unnecessary mental suffering and anguish. And, without applying appropriate meaning to it, it can lead to despair.
Yeah. And for me, and you'll be familiar with this term, it's an evolving thing. So, my purpose or the things that I found meaning in my 20s or 30s is different from now. And in my early 70s, my purpose and meaning is very different from 20 years ago. There are connections and threads along there, but we are human beings. We are evolving. We're not a static thing. I'm not a 20-year-old anymore. I'm not a 25-year-old anymore, or 35, 45. So we're always evolving. And so if we allow ourselves to step into that and to allow change and to embrace what is there and what's coming up, that is, for me, much healthier than hanging on to my identity as the CEO of an organization, or this or that, or an actor or an actress, or whatever it might be. And I was just thinking of, we've been watching a series on Apple TV, and it really got us engrossed. And there's a couple of older actors there, and the story about old actors in the 70s and 80s watching the movie of them 30 or 40 years ago when they were young and healthy and pining for how they used to be, and staying in the past rather than embracing the fact that they might be 80 and gorgeous and old and wrinkly. And what a shame that we sometimes go back into the past and go, oh, I wish I was just like this. I'm the age that I am, and I love the age that I am. I'll never be this age again. Tomorrow I'll be a day older. And so, but I'm really enjoying my aging body. Well, some parts, but sometimes I wish I could swim a little bit more, whatever, etc. But that's part of me also accepting my aging, my mortality, and not to fight it, but to bless it. What's that saying about old age? It's something that not everyone gets to have. So I'm here. I'm listening to my heart. I really love my body. We have a really nice time on the inside of us. I have a beautiful partner. We live in a beautiful part of the world. We have a gorgeous community that we live in. There are so many blessings in my life. And Julie and I, when we go for a walk around our village here, we often say, okay, 3 things. What are 3 things that we're grateful for? And those things help me to remind sometimes of the little things, just the little things that can bring so much joy. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be a simple thing. But that, to me, brings more, richness than some of the big milestones in my life. I've got to appreciate the little things more and more and more.
Yeah, gratitude is part of meaning. Like it's one of those things that it's the antidote to despair. It's what takes suffering, mental anguish and mental suffering, and makes it less powerful and less able to take hold. Being grateful for the fact that you have just a flower that you noticed, when you needed to notice it, so that you could take your mind away from all the other stuff you were going on, and to have that trippy moment where you noticed your plants and you were going, wow, like that's amazing. That's something that you can be grateful for, because it actually made it possible for you to occupy your mind elsewhere at a time when it was really important and necessary for you to do so. That supposedly insignificant flower not only gives life to you, but it gives life to us. Because of that, bees exist, and because bees exist, they pollinate other plants and they give us honey, and we learn from them, and then birds exist because of that. Like, the whole thing is not little, it's such a big thing, of such a massive thing. And it's the ability to have the wisdom to notice that little thing, which is not little. It's actually very huge, you know? And it's so beneficial to you in a moment where you needed nothing else. You didn't need medical intervention. You didn't need woo-woo intervention. You didn't need naturopathic intervention. You didn't need alternative intervention. You needed a flower to notice so that it can take your mind off it. I mean, what a gift. What an amazing thing to have that serves us.
Yes.
Just for the sake that it grew there.
And thank you. There's one thing when I had my first PET scan, and it was 5 days before I had the result. So it was almost like having a near-death experience without a near-death experience. And my awareness was like on maximum. And as I was going through this, and there was no ordinary day, I'd be going, wow, it's almost like, you know, I'm high. And I want to, part of me want to hold on to that state of consciousness. I want to keep this with me forever. And I know that everything must pass. You know, I won't have that same heightened state of consciousness. But I was able to go, here's one thing that helps me get back to that. And that one thing was focusing on detail, small, infinitesimal detail. And I can go out to my garden, and there's a crepe myrtle there, and it's flowering, and there's these big bees and little bees, and I can just focus in on the detail of every single petal, and I'll be back, not maybe in the same way, but I'll tap back into that state of consciousness, of wonder, of nothing else in this entire world except for that little petal, that little bee and that little petal in their little dance together, and the whole world goes away. And that's kind of like this, you know, kind of trippy space, and going, that's it. It's detail. It's not the big picture. It's the detail of small little things that can be quite trippy.
and in that moment, you're not depressed.
Nothing.
There's no anxiety. There's no past. There's no future. There's just the moment, the present. And it's like the most ideal place to be in that time. It's definitely that time. When you're in the doctor's surgery, you might be thinking about what you've done in the past so that you can stop doing that, so you can support your future. And that's okay. But when you're in the moment in the garden, that's really that time where everything goes away, and you can just be. You can just be. That's it. You can just be.
And the bee's going, I'm just going to be.
The bee says that as well. It says, I'm just going to be.
It said to me, it said, I'm just a bee. I'm just.
I love it. I love it. I'm going to ask you one last thing, because it's great to see you kind of being back in this space. I feel like, not because of what you had to go through with your health, but it feels like there was a bit of a pause between what you were doing when I knew you, say 10 years ago, and then the middle kind of stage, and then what I know of you now. To me, between you and me, there feels like there was a little bit of a pause between what I knew about you and how I knew you were going about life. But I knew generally what you're doing and what you're up to and how things were. And you made a couple of posts, and that first post that you made that really that kind of brought you into my awareness again was the one that you made about the 7 weeks of your treatment, and then the work that you were going to continue to do, which we spoke about, the men's stuff. And then a little while later, you made this post on Facebook, and it was really deep and meaningful to me. And I want to unpack it a little bit, because when I mention it, some people are going to think, oh yeah, that's deep. Some people are going to think, oh, well, doesn't really mean much. But when we look into it, we philosophize a little bit about it. It's really cool. And you ask this question, and it it went, if you are not following your heart, then where are you headed? And I know that when a question like that is asked by you, it's not just a surface question. I know that there's so much more depth to that, and I know exactly where you're coming from. But
Yeah.
can we unpack that a little bit? If you're not following your heart, where are you headed? What does that mean?
Okay, so I'll tell you when this phrase, this quote came from, and this is when I'd just been involved in M-braining, as we both are,
Which is
and
the multiple brain integration techniques. If anyone wants to know what M-braining is, just Google it, MBRAINING. Just Google it, perhaps buy the book. It's called Using Your Multiple Brains to Do Cool Stuff. It is one of the most profound
yes.
books you will ever read. That being said, go ahead.
Okay, so it's by Grant Sousa and Marvin Oka. And so I was just sitting and meditating, and the phrase just popped into my head. And it said, and it was a question of myself. So if I'm not following my heart, then literally, where is my head taking me? And when I've allowed my head brain to rule the roost, to decide my direction in life, to decide what I'm going to do, it hasn't been a happy ending. And my physiotherapist, around about the same time, said to me, when someone is standing with correct posture, you'll notice that their heart is slightly ahead of their head. So we are structurally and biologically designed to live from our hearts.
Wow.
So in our heart is deep meaning, is core values, is compassion for self and compassion for others. And our head brain and our gut brain are both there to serve our heart. So if I'm not following my heart and I'm following my head, I'm going to be going into the jungle. I'm going to be doing more angsting and more suffering than I need to. And when I go in and ask my heart, hey heart, what's going to make you sing? What makes you come alive? What brings joy? It's going to go into that place of compassion for myself first, and compassion for others. And from this will come my direction, purpose and meaning and joy and all those, and fulfillment and satisfaction. So for a lot of people that I work with in the corporate field, they've been driven by hard ambition, by an idea. It might be fascinating. So the head brain and the gut brain have kind of got together and said, this is what we're going to do in life. And they've gone through 3 divorces. Their kids hate them. Their body's in a mess. But they've got all these material possessions. Nothing wrong with those things. But when they're taken in place of what brings the heart joy, for me, that is true suffering and despairing. So it was really a question for me. It was, so Bill, are you going to follow your head, or are you going to listen to what your heart wants? And it was a reminder for me to come back and check into my heart, is what's filling it with joy. And when I connect with this, then my head brain can get really creative on what to do, organize the logistics, manage, research, whatever. And then my beautiful gut brain, which is around boundaries, deep core sense of self, can organize itself and my actions to deliver those things that my heart wants. And when I mentioned before that, me and my body have a really good, intimate relationship, my head and my heart and my gut have a beautiful relationship. They've really learned to kind of check in with each other. How are you going? What do you need from me? And so we had this little happy dance inside of us. And I know when my head is leading with something, but if it's disconnected, if it's directionalized by my heart, that's fine. But if it's going on a little journey all by itself, I'm going to be in shit somewhere along the track. Mm-hmm. So I had to bring myself back to, is this what my heart truly wants? Because my heart can be fickle. The fickle, when I go to Bunnings, for example, and we go, if I take my heart brain with me, it goes, oh, I want this, and I've got to have this, and my gut's brain going, well, do we actually need it? Like we've got 3 already, do we really need another one? No, I guess not. So, but underneath the fickleness is the deeper things, the deep and meaningful things, the things that are connected to purpose, deep purpose, evolving purpose. What brings meaning, what brings satisfaction, deep satisfaction, not superficial stuff. And for me, and this was really a reminder of, if I'm not following my heart, then where am I headed? And for me, I need reminders. I've been around this stuff a while, but I still need reminders of what is my heart want.
You're not perfect, huh?
No, despite what I tell Julie.
Yeah. It's been really lovely having this conversation with you and catching up with you after some time, I reckon about 5 or 6 years at least. Getting to be around you and learning from you as a wise elder that you are.
An old fart.
Yeah. Was really a pleasure at the time. I got a lot out of being in a room with you, having you at my place, connecting with you with other friends, and that it was really good. But the one thing that I remember about you that I loved the most was your hugs.
Yes, I have a bit of a reputation for that. And
best hugs ever, Bill.
Yeah. And do you know why?
Tell me.
So I learned to hug 40-something years ago. And what I learned, the secret of a good hug is it's not gender related. It's human to human. And it is breathing the same air as the other person and being fully in my body in the present moment with nothing else. My internal dialogue would be almost nil. And I'd breathe and I'd feel the other human being in front of me, close to me, and I'd feel my human being, and it'd just be 2 human beings enjoying presence together. That's it.
And you know what that experience taught me? It taught me that I was keen to get out of a hug pretty quickly. I was just coming. Yeah. I was just doing the old come in, get it, get out. Yeah. And I remember having to stay there with you.
I wasn't going to let you go.
Yeah. And then allowing myself to stay there and then experiencing the hug and then going, when we're in a room, in a training room, when we were coaching or when we were learning together, and then it was like, okay, time for the hugs. And it was like, okay, straight to Bill, go over there and get a hug over there because that's the standard, that we all need to aspire to. It was truly an interesting learning experience that to connect with somebody, you do have to be out of your head in that moment. You do have to be present and you do have to make it about the other person as much as it is about you. It has to be about the other person. And it's interesting to remember one thing about somebody who is more than, one thing above all else about somebody, and for it to be the hug. I don't know anybody else for their hugs, I know some people for their terrible handshakes and some for their overbearing hard handshakes. But the hug, it's a really interesting thing. It's the one thing that Zoom, when I interview people from all around the world, it's one thing that Zoom doesn't allow me to do. And it's the one thing that I've hoped that I wished I could do more. but we have this distance and we have all the stuff that we can't get, that Zoom doesn't offer. But it's the one thing, it's like the one thing.
Yeah. And that's like, it's pure connection. That's it.
Yeah. Bill, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
My pleasure, Phil. I have to say, I always enjoy being in your presence. We have a good time together. And for me, it doesn't matter the years passing of how often we talk. It's just coming back to that playful 5-year-old space.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode. Sharing the show with family and friends on social media will make it possible for people who may need this type of content to find it easier, and that may make a massive difference to someone that is on the road to recovery after their own experience with stroke. If you're a stroke survivor with a story to share about your experience, come and join me on the show. The interviews are not scripted. You do not have to plan for them. All you need to do to qualify is be a stroke survivor, or be a caregiver for someone who has had a stroke, or be one of the fabulous people in the medical field that help people who are stroke survivors. Go to recoveryafterstroke.com/contact, fill out the contact form, and as soon as I receive it, I will respond with more details on how you can choose a time that works for you and me to meet over Zoom. Thanks again for being here and listening. I really appreciate you. See you on the next episode.
Importantly, we present many podcasts designed to give you an insight and understanding into the experiences of other individuals. Opinions and treatment protocols discussed during any podcast are the individual's own experience, and we do not necessarily share the same opinion, nor do we recommend any treatment protocol discussed. All content on this website and any linked blog, podcast, or video material controlled this website or content is created and produced for informational purposes only and is largely based on the personal experience of Bill Gassiamas. The content is intended to complement your medical treatment and support healing. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice and should not be relied on as health advice. The information is general and may not be suitable for your personal injuries, circumstances, or health objectives. Do not use our content as a standalone resource to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease for therapeutic purposes or as a substitute for the advice of a health professional. Never delay seeking advice or disregard the advice of a medical professional, your doctor, or your rehabilitation program based on our content. If you have any questions or concerns about your health or medical condition, please seek guidance from a doctor or other medical professional. If you are experiencing a health emergency or think you might be, call 000 if in Australia, or your local emergency number immediately for emergency assistance, or go to the nearest hospital emergency department. Medical information changes constantly. While we aim to provide current, quality information in our content, we do not provide any guarantees and assume no legal liability or responsibility for the accuracy, currency, or completeness of the content. If you choose to rely on any information within our content, you do so solely at your own risk. We are careful with links we provide. However, third-party links from our website are followed at your own risk, and we are not responsible for any information you find there.